Good evenings and salutations in our distance. It is Wolfphototech, and here we are with another delightful video. This time, this is my overview review video for the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition core rule book. This is Dungeon Master's Guide. Okay, this is the 2014 version of it. In 2024, there will be an updated version to this. No one is entirely certain whether it is an updated version, like they revise a bunch of stuff in it, and they simply release it as like Dungeons & Dragons 5.25 or 5.5, or they're going to radically update it and call it Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or they're just going to go with, yeah, it's actually Dungeons & Dragons 6th edition. Congratulations. But anyways, in that situation, the score will change on this book. However, for now, this is the book for Dungeon Masters. In the quick summary of ranking priorities of purchase for people, this book is approximately second or third on the Dungeon Master list. For players, this is like number 8 or 9. It's nice for a player, if you're making characters or something like that, to have this book, because it has this magical section of magical weapons and items, as well as information on treasures and such and so forth earlier on and in the book. Some like treasure items and tables and fun stuff that players might actually find quite interesting. But otherwise, this is a book for the Dungeon Master, first and foremost. In the priority scale of Dungeon Masters, if you want to start with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the basic rules are an okay start point as a review to get an idea, like, oh, what is the basic mechanics? Before spending any money, you look at the basic rules, which is a free PDF online, and you can also get them on D&D Beyond, completely free. And then the other option on the top of that is subscribe to this channel, and then a dozen other plus tabletop gaming channels specifically around Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, because each channel has his own specialty. Say, like, go subscribe to the DM's Lair with Luke. Go to Dungeon Coach and subscribe to him. Go check out Nerdarchy or WebDM. They're all great sources of information. Dungeon Dudes is also another good option. Those are great free options right there. That's your zero option. YouTuber channels and basic rules. Your level 0 option. That's like the first thing you do. The second thing you do is pick up a starter set. Either this starter set, I have it down there because I'm working on it for an adventure. The Essentials Kit, the Dungeons & Dragons vs. Rick and Morty. By the way, these are probably the two best ones right here. Overall, I have individual videos going over what's inside them and giving you a rough idea what you get at free. Not free, but what you get and pay for in the package. But anyways, that is your first step, and then your second step as a Dungeon Master is you most definitely want to pick up this book. And I go over in a previous video the basic stuff inside that book. So your level 0 is free stuff online. Your second one is find a starter set that you want to buy. Watch my previous videos, watch some review videos online about them. Get a good idea what you are getting into. Your second option Your second move, the second one that costs money, is the Player's Handbook. And then the third one is the Dungeon Master's Guide. And the Monster Manual. Either or. Either this one or this one. This one gets you more critters. This one gets you deeper into the mechanics of the game. It depends on which direction you want to go. And then the fourth option is the other one. Alrighty. Since I got that right out of the gate, here we go with the beginning of the book. I'm going to just skim through this pretty quickly. This book is broken into 3 parts, and there's various chapters that are split up between all the parts. Each part covers a territory or area of the Game Master mechanics, and a rough theme between all those between all the chapters in that part. So, part 1 is titled Master of Worlds, Part 2 is Master of Adventures, and Part 3 is Master of Rules. But before we get into that, there's an introduction, and then there's the Dungeon Master, and how to use this book information right here. This basically goes over some philosophical aspects of dungeon mastering, some of which are like, and then some of them are like, yeah, that's pretty much part of course. My issue is that there is a few points in here, or like the world revolves around their actions part. The world should not revolve around the player's actions, but can interact with their interactions with the world, either having the effects of their interactions with the world be either increasing or decreasing in time and intensity and overall effect of the world. Sort of the butterfly effect. If your character goes and just walks down a street, all the characters in the town should not immediately greet the character, and everything should not seem like everything is immediately attracted to the character or specifically exists to interact with the character, but should exist in a world in which then the character is capable of interacting with, which then causes chains of interaction to occur. So there is some things I'm like, in this book, and then there's some things like, yeah, I agree with that. But anyways, the Master of Worlds basically just goes over like the different types of worlds, campaigns, adventures your characters can get into. And some people kind of mix up the concept of adventures and campaigns, and you do not want to start with immediately thinking of like a super grand adventure. You're all the way from level 1 to 20 or something like that. You want to start with an adventure that's like 3 or 4 levels. You get a feel for everything, how your players want to play, and then you kind of craft stuff in to the adventure and see what they grab onto and take off with. And then eventually you can actually craft out a deeper story between all the adventures that eventually leads to some big, cool event and here and there. You don't want to just create a narrative campaign from level 1 to 20 and then have your players start at level 1 and then just play through your chain of events to get to the big event at the end, because that leads towards railroading as a dungeon master, and players typically do not like railroading. It also demoralizes them in sense of their interactions in the world, and it stops making them feel like they matter in the world. They're just simply pushing buttons like a pigeon to have things happen. What you want to do is just have a world that has stuff in it. You don't have to build everything in the world. You want to identify the style of world. You want it like grimdark. You want it like noir, murder, mystery kind of feel. You want it mirthful fantasy, crazy fairies, and all kinds of stuff like that. You want it really gritty in detail. That is awesome. You also want to double check with your players and confirm with your players what kind of settings they're interested in worlds. And you probably want to like pick the one that you as a dungeon master will enjoy making and running, but B, just happens to weave or exist in the combined space of interest in which all the other players are interested in, because that way you're more likely to have yourself being energized as an individual, creating a awesome world for your players, as well as your players wanting to interact with the world. You also want to throw in some fun jokes, and every so often, you can have a really grim, dark universe, and then just have some really hilarious little things happen here and there, to bring up the mood. You don't have to like pound horror and terror into your characters all the times, because if you try to make a world that is all to just one thing or oppressively a thing, eventually your players will just wear out of that. You can make it so grim dark, or you can make it so fairy fun fantasy that it actually causes the world to become gray to the players. And what I mean by gray, as in like it's just they desensitize to it. The grim dark stops feeling grim darky. The fayness stops feeling really fey. The noir-esque aspects stop being noir-esque. They just are a thing. Interestingly enough, noir is kind of like play of light and dark, and has a lot of shades of gray weaved into it. But anyways, that's also getting into part 1 of the book, and it also builds into like building worlds and other stuff like that. Master of Adventures is basically adding in characters, events in the world, environmental effects, catastrophes, kinds of things like that. There's all kinds of tables in that section that goes over, gives you options for doing that. And then the Master of Rules is kind of three-ish major sections. It's basically learning how to play the game, how to run the game for the players, all the core mechanics, and how to modify and craft new monsters, new mechanics, introduce new components and variant rules into the system, and you go from there. Right in here, this section is all about knowing your players, because there is a wide variety of players in Dungeons & Dragons, or Call of Cthulhu, or Pathfinder, or Traveler, or the Mutant Epoch, or etc. Some of these players, by the way, it's very important to realize that players oftentimes will have no clue what type of player they are. So you have to figure that mess up situation sometimes. Because sometimes you'll have players who will claim they're a high roleplay concept person, but they're really just a power gamer. Or they think they are an actor, but they just try to bully people along, and that's not good. No. But you have the acting, the exploring, the investigating, the fighting, the optimizing, the problem solving, the storytelling types of players, and they got characteristics roughly worked in. You give it a read, it's interesting. Now we're on to the Master of Worlds section. We have this delightful piece of artwork. Yes, indeed. Yeah. And there's some more beautiful artwork. I sometimes can switch into different voices. I actually love that one because it adds so much play. Yes, indeed. The big picture, core assumptions, and it's your world. An important point is that the big picture, in an artistic sense, is when you zoom way back, what are the big things in the world, like the castle and the big mountains and the forest and the river and the big scenes, like there's a war in the nation nearby between another nation that's next door to them, and stuff like that. Not the tiny little things, the interactions of every little character in the world and stuff like that. The big parts. The core assumption sections is basically tied around to like the gods of your world. The world is ancient. Much of the world is untamed. Conflict shapes the world in history. The world is magic category. Whatever you want to go with, like there is a major magical culture amongst your peoples. They have various core religions tied into the natures and the schools of magic, or that the world is just largely a wide open, untamed place, and society is just these tiny little pockets here and there, and so forth. There are other systems that cover into this, other TTRPGs, particularly OSR products, that really blow up these aspects into really deep concepts. But then you go from there. It's your world. As a dungeon master, you are the person who creates the world or arbitrates the world. You inherently make sure that the world is consistent or semi-consistent the vast majority of the time. And you make sure that the interactions of the player's characters with the world has reactions to them, not necessarily consequences, because consequences conceptually to a person mean that there is a negative interaction that inherently occurs off of it. As in, you do a bad thing comes back to you. You do a good thing, no good deed goes unpunished kind of thing. No. There should be good things happening from bad things happening from good things, good thing, and bad things happening from bad things, good things happening from good things. There should be a blend of situations. There should just be gray situations in between there, like bad thing happens, nothing happens from it. Good thing happens, nothing happens from it. It's just like life. It adds texture to the world. You also want to make sure that there is enough depth to the world that the characters can believe there is a world. Like, that there's various gods and religions, short list of the domains that are tied to them and stuff like that. Some famous holidays, what kind of week there is roughly. However, you don't need to have 50 holidays alternating every X many days with exact rituals or anything. You can have some loose, rough drafts of that stuff, but you don't have to go super deep into detail. If players start getting interested in stuff in that direction, and you happen to find that you have a player that is really engaged with certain things, you can always flush them out. Or a really good dungeon master will sometimes even bring over that player, like, you seem to be really into the concept of crafting items. Let's chit-chat about this. I got some rough ideas. What do you happen to have any ideas or any sources that you happen to be looking into? Say like Pathfinder 2nd Edition or something like that you come across at some point that interests you, that might actually be convertible into Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, that we can use as a launch board or to expand the crafting mechanics for you. It has to be balanced and deep, and you cannot know the entirety of all the things, but any kind of like feedback you have on that or something, you know. This section goes into the gods of the world and their domains. Typically with a god, there is typically the name of the god of tyranny, like an epithet, you know, like Kalganu of the morning rising sun or something like that, or the blazing fury of righteousness. And then there is alignment, which is basically cosmic relationship of the various factions, of whether or creatures want to bring together order and positivity into the world, or order and oppressiveness, or chaotic good, like good is spread freely all over the place. There's no attention to details on such things, or just random chaos for the heck and fun of it. There you go. Then there's also suggested domains. Oftentimes various gods will have a domain or multiple domains. This often ties into clerics and paladins and stuff like that, but you can also relate this into various characters in the system. Then you have the symbol section, you know, like Kalgor, or the blazing fury of righteousness, the rising sun of the morning. Happens to have a sun rising from between two mountains with a fist inside of it. You know? There you go. This section ties into a section that's further into the back of the book that goes into more pantheons and stuff like that. This also goes over simple pantheons, mystery cults, other religious systems, tight pantheons, divine rankings within gods, you know, like greater deities, lesser deities, quasi-deities, below quasi-deities. You can also, they don't have that here, but you've also got demigods, which also could be tied into quasi-deities. And it just continues on about the various gods and philosophies of deities or other forces that bring forth order in life. And then you come into this section, which is about towns and settlements and stuff like that, and provinces, you know, like how big is a kingdom, how big is a empire, continent scale, local colors. You know, some cultures have certain colors tied to their culture. Home bases for your characters. Adventuring sites, sizes, like the size of a village. Basic concepts tied into what is a village, what is a town, what is a city. The atmosphere, how the town feels, the climate of a region. You have some really nice stuff here. Forms of government. Currency explained out here. You also have alternate forms of currency concepts that you can use to add into your adventures. You got a section on factions, you know, like you got the Harpers, the Order of the Gauntlet, the Emerald Enclave, the Lord's Alliance, and the Zentarum. And then you have a sample faction right here. And then you have the concept of renown, like fame, glory, what people think of your character and so forth, or characters, or kingdoms, or etc. Benefits of renown, losing renown, piety, which ties towards into religious ends, magic in the world. Another sample faction, the Zentarum here, and it keeps going and going. Restrictions on magic, schools of magic, etc., etc. Creating a campaign starts small. It does indeed it suggest, as I did earlier in the book video, that you do indeed don't want to like go crazy and want to build a huge ass world and stuff like that. You really just want to like start with something simple, and then just like find what your players really engage with. Expanding onto this good idea is that sometimes it's just a good idea to just start with a simple adventure like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 maybe. Not too many things in it. Just to find, if you're a new dungeon master, what your players enjoy, and then you bring that one to an end. You take your notes of what the players enjoy, and then you incorporate that into a future campaign, which may be equal in size, slightly smaller, or slightly larger. There's no real reason why to make it immediately bigger. If it happens to be doing really well and you can add on to it, go for it. If it's not, you can let it go. Don't get too obsessed with your story. Just let the story grow and evolve as you go along and having fun. This section is on setting the stage, campaign events, and such like that. Leader types within religious organizations, world-shaking events, such like that. There's a few tables here. We're getting into the section where they're starting to have a lot more tables, like weather events, cataclysms, invading forces coming into your nation. Some hostile invaders come into your town and do some nasty things. Extinction or depletion concepts. New organizations, how to build a new organization. Discoveries, like you just discovered a ancient kingdom under the sands, and so forth. You have information on constructing calendars and holidays in here, and some good general theory behind that. You got another section on play styles of your players and how to play into that some more. You got character name section, continuing or episodic campaigns, which are pretty nice. You got a section covering over the tiers of play, like level 1 to 4 local heroes, level 5 to 10 heroes of the realm, level 11 to 16 masters of the realm, and level 17 to 20 masters of the world or multiverse. Then you go into a section on flavors of fantasy, like sword and sorcery, epic fantasy, heroic fantasy, mythic fantasy, dark fantasy, intrigue, mystery, swashbuckling, war, WotC, crossing the streams, which is basically just like you're going to take a bit from this style and you're going to take a bit from that style and you're going to smash them together in some interesting ways and get on from there. Then there is creating a multiverse section, which then goes into planes, the higher plane concepts, lower plane concepts, inner and outer, interconnecting planes between there. Gives you also some pre-built concepts for various types of planes as well. But also, as it comes into here, you also get a table for D20, covering various different planes, how to astral colors and so forth, so you can randomly generate like a portal, like, oh, I want to roll a D20, I got a 16, and you get Arborea, and it's a sapphire blue portal. That's the color for it. You got the astral plane, you got the ethereal plane information, you got Feywild, you got tables for psychic winds in the astral plane. You have ethereal curtains, which is an interesting mechanic for the ethereal plane, and ether cyclones random table. A little information on Seelie and Unseelie Fey down here. And then you also have, on this next page, a handy-dandy little table down here for time shenanigans in the Feywild. Then you have the Shadowfell, as well as a Shadowfell Despair table. The concept of inner planes, which is the elemental planes. Then you got outer planes. Each page basically covers a major plane, like the plane of earth, the plane of fire, the plane of water, the plane of air. Then you got outer planes like Mount Celestia, Bitopia, Elysium, and Limbo, and Ysgard, and so forth. You got Kasiri, Hades, and so many other. The Abyss as well. Ghana. And then you also have some optional rules tossed in here for your fun time in the Nine Hells and other stuff. Mechanicus. Adeptus Mechanicus. Ooh, they just gave me an evil idea. And then you have a section on other planes of existence, like the Outlands and Sigil. Demi-planes, Far Realm, and so forth, as well as other interesting worlds like Eberron, Erebius, Mysteria, Athos, Kirin Oruth, and Toril. And then we get into Part 2, Master of Adventures. The Master of Adventures section happens to have a Trask, which is way underpowered for Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. I do have to stop and note that Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition and the CER system is structurally balanced as if there is A, no feats, B, there is no multiclassing, and C, it's built around the balance or the approximate balance of character classes from the core player rulebook, as well as the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which is basically obsolete now. So there you go. There's Chapter 3 is about creating adventures, elements of great adventure, and so forth. It has some nice little useful information, like talking about useful maps, published adventures, adventure structure, middle, ending, beginning, middle, and end, adventure types like location-based adventures, event-based adventures, and so forth. You got adventure goals, wilderness goals, and so forth. You got, in this section, there happens to be a lot of tables, as you can see. Wherever you see all these pink sections, those happen to be tables. These happen to be random roll tables, which you can allow to randomize events in your world. The more random your events are, like, say your characters are going along and they went from one town to another, they completed the quest for a king, there is still a war or conflict going on between kingdoms, the warrior king is out on the front lines, you roll for, say, like, death or survival or victory, the king dies, and you have a plot twist that the dice have just given you. It goes into event-based adventures, mystery-based adventures, and so forth. Framing events, complications within events, moral quandaries, side quests, twists, and turns. You have a rather interesting section here. XP thresholds by character level. So, like, what amount of XP or monsters in which your characters are getting into fights with, and roughly what kind of XP they hand out for when they get into fights with each other. So this is actually also a mechanic for balancing your adventures as well as notes on party sizes and how it interacts with the difficulty system. Because Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition is a very action economy based system. The more actions or interactions you have with the world in a action or actions grants power to the characters, which is a good part of why a lot of monsters seem to be underpowered compared to characters, because it's designed that way, but also the scaling of the number of interactions with things, like a wizard throwing out a fireball and hitting 8 creatures. That is an action that results in 8 attacks on different creatures. So they effectively had one action equal 8 actions. which is why wizards and spellcasters are quadratic, where fighters and other classes are more linear in their growth. This section talks about the adventuring day and the XP allotment in that, random encounters, fun combat encounters, and stuff like that. Triggering random encounters, I like to roll them ahead of time before the session even starts, so I know that at certain points means that, hey, there's going to be a ghoul fight, and so forth. Checking for random encounters information in here. Sylvan Forest encounters tables. And then you get into Chapter 4, creating non-player characters. This gives you instructions for how to whip them up really quickly and simple, or tweak and refine them to exact degrees of what you want. This can range from anywhere from building them offensively or basically socially or adventure to your exploration side. This section basically gets into small stuff like abilities, appearance, talent, mannerisms, interactions, bonds. You got random tables in here galore for just quickly throwing that together. You got some optional rules tossed in here as well, like loyalty and so forth. And for the NPC party members, you got low-level followers, adventurer NPCs, and so forth. Instructions. Contacts, patrons, hirelings, extras, and then you have a section on villains and random tables tied to that. So you also have this situation where you have a nested table where you roll a d20 and then you roll various other dice. Like you roll a d20, you get a 1, you get agricultural devastation, and then you roll a d4 to find out what kind of agricultural devastation. You roll a 1 and a 1, you got agricultural devastation, then a 1 again, and you get blight. So some kind of disease is attacking your tomatoes. I always hated that when that happened, which only tends to happen when there's high humidity at night and no wind. There's also a section on building villains, and right in here there's villainous class options, Cleric, Death Domain, and Paladin Oathbreaker. So many people want to play those classes because they're actually a little cranked up on power, but okay. And then you have Chapter 5, Adventure Environments. The previous chapter is mostly about characters and NPCs in the world. This chapter is all about adventuring out into the wilderness, going to exotic locations like a fortress in the mountains, dungeons in a cavern, and so on and so forth. And you got tons and tons of random tables here for constructing, coming up with various denizens of dungeons or the forest or such and so forth, and as well as NPCs, and you can stick classes on things, as well as you can also have traps, lairs, mazes, mine, etc. You got a little section on dungeon ecology, encounter difficulty, mapping a dungeon, and so forth. This, by the way, is how you draw a map for Dungeons. This is how you draw a map for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you want to put hidden stuff on here, you can draw the lines for the grid, and then draw a bar down the side and a bar across the top with letters and numbers, so you can cross-reference into it. There are books that have maps by third-party companies that are absolutely ranging from borderline just usable to terrible. And some of them get really high reviews on Amazon because people simply buy the books, look at the books, say, that's cool, and put a good review on Amazon without ever using it or putting it into play with ever using it by putting it into play with players. Because once you start putting stuff like that into a play with players, you suddenly discover that really beautiful artistic map is a pile of crap. I'm not joking, because you end up with a person who either cannot process all the crazy stuff on the map, Or you get people, because there's so much detail on the map, they want to spend hours trying to figure out every darn thing on the map. And then in some cases, they put like numbers or letters on the map, and then you have to erase them, and then have to draw all the detail back into that blank spot, and it just creates new problems. There's environmental information for dungeons and adventure regions. Like there's also dungeon hazards like green slime, webs, yellow mold, and so forth. You got wilderness section here, how to add in variety of things into the wilderness, travel locations, etc. Mapping the wilderness, monuments in the wilderness, so forth. You get a nice little section. You got rules for extreme cold, extreme heat, strong wind, heavy precipitation, high altitude, wilderness hazards like desert ground, frigid water, quicksand, razor vine, slippery ice, and thin ice over here, as well as food and water information as for foraging. So if your characters are out in the wilderness, you got DCs right here for that as well. And then you have, and it continues on to wilderness navigation and so forth. There's the wilderness navigation, and then there's information on settlements, like little tiny towns or little groups of buildings tucked into the wilderness between like mountains or trees or stuff like that, and building types and how many people are in that thing. And then you got some mapping the settlement. You got this really nice map right here. You got some random tables like a D12 plus D8 table, and so forth. Shops for your little towns. You got underwater adventure rules, ocean, seas, and so forth. You got all kinds of fun stuff. You got airborne adventures information right here, so that's also cool as well. And then you go from airborne adventures into trap mechanics. This is actually fairly decent, but not the most amazing thing. This also contradicts somewhat how Xanathar's Guide has it done. The DMG kind of also has contrasting aspects or mechanics different from the Xanathar's Guide, which is an expansion book. Most players will own Xanathar's Guide, so if you're a dungeon master, you might not want to use it, or you might actually want to use it, depending on how you want to play your game with your players. You got simple traps, you got complex traps in here, but it's mostly simple traps. Or to be correct, they're semi-complex traps. Then you have section on Chapter 6, Between Adventures, like linking adventures, like if you like go through Lost Mines of Phandalin, how do you transition Lost Mines of Phandalin into Storm King's Thunder or Rise of Tiamat? Stuff like that. Advice on how to combine multiple different adventures together into one campaign. So forth. Like foreshadowing, campaign tracking, downtime activities, like working on the farm, crafting, stuff like that. I happen to have that in there. You got carousing rules. This is also another section that has a equivalent section in Xanathar's Guide with slightly different rules. So before you really get into a game, you decide whether, if you have both books, you decide which one you want to use, because there is some conflicting information between the two books. So there you go. Yet again, it's into sowing rumors, creating downtime activities. And then you have Chapter 7, which is treasures, which is absolutely delightful, like coins, gemstones, art objects, magic items. There's also random tables in here by value of items, like 10 gold pieces, 50 gold pieces, 100 gold pieces, 500 gold piece value item, gemstones, 1,000, 5,000, 25 gold piece art objects, 250 gold piece art objects, and so forth. This also is great. It has a, as I said, a random table, so you can always like, oh, I want to have an art object that is roughly 25 gold pieces in value. I can't quite decide what I want to do, so I roll my die, and I get carved bone statue. So your player finds a carved bone statue in a pile of stuff, and so forth. Then there's this section on magic items, the concept of rarity, explaining it out right here, relationship to level, and value of magic items by level. And then you have various rules about identifying magic items. There's a variant rule here as well, attunement, and a random table for gold and magic items and treasure. So, like, you roll a D100, 0 to 100, you get X amount of, you identify that you get copper pieces, and you roll the 5d6 to figure out how many copper pieces your characters get. And the same thing goes for various art objects and magic items. And it keeps going through that. Cursed items, magic item categories like armors, potions, rings, rods, scrolls, staves, wands, weapons, wondrous items. Goes into information about wielding said items. There's also a rule in here, very important, that there is a rule here for mixing potions. If your character, you have a player that has a character who drinks one magic potion and then immediately drinks another magic potion, there is a random table here to find out exactly what happens when you do that. There's also a variant rule for scroll mishaps as well as a magic item formulas variant rule section here, as well as a variant wands that don't recharge rule. Yet again, more random tables for finding out fun stuff. What quirk does it have? You got a random table for rarity of magic items. More random tables. You got random table A, random table magic item table B, C, G, E, H, I. I'm just skipping along. Then you have this section called magic items. If any reason why a player is going to buy the Dungeon Master's guide, if they're not going to be a Dungeon Master, it's this reason right here. And they're most likely going to read this section right here. They might at some random point in the future find out that there's 2 classes stuffed earlier in the book. In which case, then you might get players starting to pester you because they want to play an Oathbreaker or Death Domain Cleric, which are more powerful than typical subclasses for those classes. However, they're not nearly as overpowered as the newer classes after Tasha, from Tasha's on, so you have to keep a memo on that. You got a variety of delightful magical items of various rarities, anywhere from common to very rare. And then you get all the way back here. You smash it all the way back here. There's the tomes. Everyone wants a tome. Everyone wants a manual. Everyone wants a tome. And you keep going. And there's a lot of magic items in here, but darn it, Wizards of the Coast could literally make a book that's nothing but magic items, and it will sell like hotcakes to both players and Dungeon Masters. But anyways, a lot of pages. I'm literally skipping like 5 or 6 pages right there. Then right back here, I have to back up a little bit, you got the section on artifacts. There's also rules here for minor quirks of artifacts and major ones. Minor detrimental properties, major detrimental properties. So you got minor beneficial, minor, major beneficial, minor detrimental, major detrimental properties. You got rules on destroying artifacts or brain food on how to do it. Sample artifacts like the Axe of the Dwarven Lords, the Book of Exalted Deeds, the Book of Vile Darkness, and so forth. Artifacts are like top tier items that should only really appear much later in the campaigns, sometime after level 10 or something like that. Depending on how you want to play their positives and negatives. And then you get all the way to the end of the artifact section, and then you get into another area that so many people kind of just like gloss past and forget that actually exists. But there's a section on other rewards, like supernatural gifts like blessings and charms and boons as well. You got marks of prestige, like you can get your character a medal or a ribbon or something like that, or a purity seal. Characters can be gifted land in towns, like, hey, you did so much good stuff around here, we're literally giving you this square land. You got special favors, like you do something really good for a character, like save their lives, they might want to pay you back with a special favor. You got strongholds, titles, and then, as I said before, epic boons, which are blessings from gods. There is actually instructions in here. When you hit level 20 in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, that you can actually use epic boons as your continuation on past level 20 as a means of rewarding your players continuously playing. You no longer gain experience for levels, but you gain experience to essentially randomly gain an epic boon at every so many increments. And it gives you it doesn't give you a chart on what levels to give epic boons, but it gives you a basic rule of thumb, like every so many points, go ahead and give them an epic boon, or so many points as an option. Then they also give you, there's also a section on training as well up here. But then here's examples of epic boons. Some of these are okay, and some of these are really good. Okay, like there's like Boon of Fortitude. Your hit point maximum increases by 40. That's nice. Then you have Boon of Skill Proficiency. You gain proficiency in all skills. You gain proficiency in all skills. That's nice. And then you get Boon of Peerless Aim. You can give yourself a plus 20 bonus to a ranged attack roll you make. Once you use this boon, you can't use it again until you finish a short rest. So there you go. Essentially, you can make a character so they cannot miss with a boon. And then you have this fun little section about running the game, which is a part of Part 3, Master of the Rules. As I said before earlier in the book, it goes over table talk, dice rolling, attacks and defense, all the basic mechanics of how to adjudicate various things and deal with various issues at the table. Small groups, new players, using ability scores, ability checks, attack rolls, saving throws, proficiency mechanics, advantage, disadvantage, tools, etc., etc. Inspiration. They give you some basic rules on inspiration, role-playing, heroism, reward for victory, gear elimination, genre emulation, players and inspiration. Gives you examples of when to, and what you can reward. But you can also have variant rules in here, like only players award inspiration. Like you have all your players vote on who was the best player of that session, and they hand out inspiration to that person. You got resolutions and consequences. I actually covered that myself earlier in the video. Using a map here, noticing other creatures, visibility outdoors, social travel pace, special travel paces, tracking, and so forth. It just keeps going and going. Role-playing being the NPC, objects, and so forth. The size and how that affects the damage of monsters in combat. So if you want to build a monster that is gargantuan, you happen to have improvised damage rules for different size monster attacks and how it interacts with your opponents. You have rules on how your characters can maneuver around the battlefield, provoking opportunity attacks or not provoking opportunity attacks, whether they can hit a target or not hit a target that's behind X amount of cover or so. You got a little section on chase rules here, ending a chase, complications within chases. You got a section on siege equipment like ballistas, cannons, Mongols, rams, and so forth. You go to here, and then you got diseases, crackle fever, sewer plague, as examples. And then you got poisons, which actually is a rather interesting section. You got a section on simple poisons, as well as purchasing poison, crafting and harvesting poisons, and so forth. Madness as a mechanic for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So if you you play Call of Cthulhu and you want to include madness as a system in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you got rules there. You also got absent character information rules, how do you work that out, milestone concepts, level advancement without XP, curing madness, and so forth. Then you have the Dungeon Chapter 9, the Dungeon Master's Workshop, which basically explains how to build characters, NPCs in even more fine detail than earlier, specifically around mechanics as opposed to character traits. And then there's also sections in here on creating your own classes, creating your own subclasses, creating your own backgrounds, creating your own monsters, using alien technology like pistols, muskets, rifle hunting, laser pistol, anti-material rifle, and so forth. There's also mechanics in here on plot points and variant rules and options for such fun stuff. Variant rules for initiative, just in case you get bored with the regular initiative system, there's actually multiple variant rules like side factors, side initiative, initiative score concept, action options, so forth. There is rules on overrun, shove aside, hitting cover. Tons of variant options in here. Massive damage rules. Creating a monster in here as well as a general CR table on that. So if you want to create a monster for that's CR level 30, they have suggestions here on the proficiency bonus, armor class, how much hit point range they should have, and so forth, as well as they give you various instructions on types and sizes and alignments and so forth, even in more finer detail, how to fine tweak your basic features and so forth. It keeps going and going. Various example monsters and characteristics and how they may play out on them. So forth. Creating NPCs, more specifically mechanics based around various races and other monster types. Monsters with classes, so like now you have a beholder that happens to also be a wizard. Stuff like that. And it just keeps going and going, and you got tons and tons of fun stuff. So there you go. Creating new character options, as I said before, like sub-races, races. I kind of got ahead of myself. Then you get to Appendix A, which is a random dungeon generator page. You can roll out some random dungeons. You can start with your rooms, and you just go through how many doors are in this room, what kind of stuff is in this room, so forth. Chambers, different types of dungeons, and so forth. obstacles, traps, trap triggers, fun stuff back here. This is great for just quick whipping together a dungeon in a really quick order, and also throwing stuff into the dungeon, like books, what type of book you find in a library or something in a dungeon, chairs, tables, things like that. Then you have Appendix B, which is monster lists by XP and stuff. This ties into the monster manual. And it just goes by region, like hill monsters, mountain monsters, swamp monsters, underdark monsters, underwater monsters, urban monsters, monsters by challenge rating list. Just keeps running through, and so forth. This is just a neat, handy-dandy section. And then you have Appendix C, which is a bunch of maps for various dungeons and places, which can be used by you or could just be used as a base concept. And then you have Appendix D, which basically shoots over like some reading options you want to get into. Right here, I have quite a few of these books actually already. Like, I happen to have both of Gary Gygax's books, Roleplaying Mastery and Master of the Game. And so forth. I'll cover those at a later point. And then back here, any good book will have an index section that covers a variety of terms and where to find them in the book if you want to look for them. It is fairly decent, but not completely precise and elaborate. How I want to say this is that it references many pages tied to a thing, but not all things, and not every page that is related to that thing. So, you don't get, if you look at perception, you get the biggest sections for perception, but not all instances in which perception is listed or mentioned in the book. So, there you go. Finish out with some artwork and the back cover, and there you go. I do say that this is essentially a 4-star book as it is currently, a 4+ star. However, when it gets to say like 2024, when they're going to do the update, it's most likely going to change. It's going to drop in ranking unless everyone just stays with this current 5th edition instead of upgrading to the next version, which case is this is going to hold on to its value and so forth. It might still also be very useful as a reference source and brain food. I have personally found that every editions of Dungeons & Dragons, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, 1st edition, 4th edition, 3.5, all the books have some really interesting combination of concepts that you can farm for other editions. So if you don't find something in this book, chances are you will find it in like an older edition Dungeons & Dragons book, or go and check out Pathfinder's Gamemasters Guide, which is also a really good book to check out for farming for some fun ideas. So this is the default de facto Dungeon Master book for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There are some good add-on concepts that are included in Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. However, those books are also a blend of also player options and stuff like that. So this is still the number one book you go for, but then you definitely want to look into like picking up Xanathar's Guide after this, as well as the monster books as well, like Monster Manual, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foe, Volo's Guide to Monsters, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, and if you really have to have everything, you also pick up Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. Other than that, I say this is first on your list as a Dungeon Master after the Player's Handbook and a starter set. So thank you very much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed this video. Also, yeah, alternate off rule on the monster manual if you really want to have more monsters. But anyways, I hope you have a delightful day, a nice night, a wonderful weekend, a magnificent month, and see you next time.